Okay. Hello, ladies. Welcome to my panel, having a fun start today. I want to first start by introducing all of you either to each other or to anyone that joins us along the way. If you're watching the recording, hi, thank you for signing up. I'm going to start with Kristine. Say hello, Kristine. Just a little wave.
Hi. Hello.
Kristine is an author, intuitive mentor, and she's also a mom. She helps women heal core wounds to conceive the life of their dreams. She's the founder of her community, Mamas. She seeks to bring back the village to motherhood through intentional workshops, conversations, and community.
Yeah.
There you are. Melissa, hey, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm hot. Melissa is a mom of 3 and a Connecticut psychotherapist. She has a new website up today. It's very exciting. She specializes in perinatal mental health, and she is on a mission to create group and individual support for moms to just help us through our journeys of finding ourselves again. Danielle. Hi, Danielle.
Hi.
Danielle Smith is a licensed mental health therapist and certified perinatal professional. She has a virtual private practice in New Jersey, and she provides therapy for all things pregnancy and postpartum, fertility, all of the things. So we're going to get into it. She's also a coach for moms who are married to first responders. So it's like, I just love it. I keep like highlighting it on all my things because I think it's such an interesting niche and so needed.
Yeah, thank you.
So I would say anyone feel free to put questions in the chat, but right now it's just us. So there's no questions in the chat. Unless Jose, you have questions, feel free. All right, so let me get started. The major theme that came out of, I think, all of my interviews with each of you was the need for community and connection from pregnancy all the way through your motherhood journey, whether you have 1 kid, 5 kids, you're a mom for a year, you're a mom for 20 years, there's all different challenges along the way. And I think just generally too, societally, just how the support for moms is lacking in so many different avenues. I want to start, if you could each share a little bit about your own motherhood journey and how community has impacted you. And what it has meant for you in your motherhood journey. Kristine, if you wouldn't mind starting, and we'll go around the horn.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am in Miami, Florida, and I feel like my initiation into motherhood was with really traumatic birth stories. So, once you're pregnant and you're kind of like walking around, it's like everyone decides to give you this unsolicited advice, or it's almost like, a rite of passage we share as women. So all of a sudden, all of these women are coming up to you, telling you about how traumatic or how hard, it's like all of these negative associations. And I was just completely floored, but also really saddened by the level of trauma that women are holding close to them around the birthing process and the initiation into motherhood, something that we don't speak about openly. It's kind of like the secret, like, oh, okay, you're pregnant, now I can tell someone. It's kind of like the secret underground society of like trauma that's being perpetuated. And that really moved me to start my community, Mamas, so that we could start talking about these things before we become pregnant, before, like, when we're consciously conceiving. Like I found that so many women are wanting to be better moms than we had. And so that process starts long before we're actually pregnant. And that's why community has meant so much to me and for the women that I hold space for.
Yeah, I've often wondered and asked many guests, like, how do we reach women before they're pregnant?
Yeah.
Because I think it's hard to grasp, and it's hard to even care about it really until you are pregnant. But then you get pregnant and then you have a kid, and it feels like such a shock to the system
Yeah.
which in some sense is inevitable, right? It's a major thing we're doing, but yeah, that's, I appreciate your message so much, because if you go into it better prepared and you know what to expect, you're setting yourself up for more success. So
Totally.
yeah, so Melissa, why don't you go next?
Sure. I'm going to piggyback off of that because I always say if we had the systems, I think I said this on the podcast that I talked with you on, if we had the systems in place for mom, from the moment that they, I guess even before they get to the OB's office, right? But from the moment at least that they get to the OB's office and they find out that they're pregnant, if we had systems in place for these moms to be able to reach out to, should they need to, because I think when you first find out that you're pregnant, especially if it's your first time, you don't know what you're going to need or if you're going to need anything in the long run. But if you had the systems and the support built in from the start, instead of reaching out when you're then in the trenches and you don't know who to reach out to, or where to even start, you would have the places, the things already in place just to reach within and remember the conversation that you had. So I think really it's a system-wide or like a nationwide crisis really, where women are getting pregnant, they're showing up to their OB's office, they're having all these checkups for the baby, we're taking care of the baby and the mom for the 9 months, but we're not tending enough to mom during that process. And I always say, I know every mom's going to have a different take, but in the groups that I run, we talk a lot about what we wish that we were warned about before the baby actually arrives. And even in my own experience as a mom, I was a therapist when I became a mom. I wasn't a maternal mental health therapist, but nobody told me about baby blues. So I was 2 weeks postpartum. I was trying to figure out nursing and everything was just chaotic. And then the sun would set around 5 o'clock and I would start crying for no reason. And I remember saying to my mom, like, there's something wrong with me. Like, I just keep crying and it has nothing to do with the baby. Like, I knew about postpartum depression. I'm like, I'm feeling bonded to her. And then later on, I found out what it was. And I'm like, man, if I just knew that that's what it was, I wouldn't have felt, first of all, I felt so isolated because I didn't know even who to say it to other than a best friend. But not everyone has the same experience. So that's why I feel like by the third go around, and maybe this is why they say with each kid, you pick up a little bit of confidence. I already knew how important community was. And I've said this to moms too. It's like you sometimes wonder like how different it would have been if I knew all of this with my first. Now, of course, the journey has to evolve how it evolves. But I think about that a lot, about the mom I was when I had my daughter and the mom I am now with my third, and it's just night and day. I know so much more now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I know. I have three of my best friends are, well, the one just gave birth and the 2 others are about to give birth. And, it's just interesting being on the group text with them and being a mom of 2 and hearing all the, like, reading all the back and forth and just either biting my tongue or like carefully like sharing some what to expect, because there's part of it, like you said, where you just have to go through the experience, and no one is going to be able to tell you exactly how your individual experience is going to be, but to know that you have the people to turn to once you're in the experience makes a world of difference. Danielle, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I can relate so much to what Melissa is saying. I'm a mom of 2, and I agree. Like, I feel like if I knew, I wish I knew what I know now when I was going through my first, because I had a very similar experience. No one really talked about it with me. I was a therapist as well, but not a perinatal therapist at that point. So I really didn't know what to expect. I think I learned so much, and especially with my second, I knew, I guess, like what I needed in terms of a community, in terms of support, especially with my husband being a police officer and his like long shifts and working overnight and being by myself at night was a huge trigger for me that first time. So I learned that I really needed to rely on my support system because they're there. But I had a hard time actually expressing that I needed them for certain things. So I think that was a huge takeaway from my first postpartum experience that I needed to bring into the second one in order to like even just get through it.
Yeah, I know. I had a hard time asking for help too. And I think even now, I know this is going to sound silly because of what I do, but professionally, like this, for me, community feels like a great word. I want to be there for other women. I want to connect with you as part of my community. But personally, community gives me a pit in my stomach. I have a hard time, and I'm getting better at it, but I have a hard time on the personal side, reaching out, connecting with people, seeking it out. Like it just feels uncomfortable for me. So, Melissa, I'll ask you, what are some ways that women can start to find and build this community? Because a lot of times you might be fortunate to have people already in your network, and sometimes you may not. So, what do we do? How do we start to build the community, especially from the point of view of someone that maybe hears it and goes, oof, I don't know, maybe they're shy, or someone said it earlier, like at the point of already struggling, what do we do?
Yeah. So in an ideal world, right, I feel like women should be equipped at the hospital when the lactation specialists are coming in and the pediatrician is coming in, we should have mental health in some capacity, probably a perinatal specialist coming in and saying, you may not be feeling this now, but these are all the things that could happen. And here's a list of resources that you could turn to in the event that you start feeling these things. And I think that that's really, if it's not going to start during pregnancy, then it needs to start there so that mom and partner leave the hospital knowing like these are the signs. But that's an imperfect world. And I think that's what we're all here trying to work towards. But I always encourage to start community. I think, first of all, I think social media and the internet in our day and age as moms is like a blessing and a curse. And the way that it's a blessing is that you can start there in the sense of, I started there with these like moms groups on Facebook that are local moms groups. So there's other moms within your community that you could connect with, that you could put in my specific town. There's one specific to my town, which should be in every town, but that was so helpful because there's moms who are posting there for meetups and play dates. But for the mom who doesn't have that or doesn't even know where to begin, one of the things that I found really helpful with my first is my pediatrician's office did it. They offered a mommy's group basically, and this was pre-COVID, so it was all in person. And you would go with your baby and there would be other moms there with their babies. And it was just like the starting foundation of how to build a community. And I was a nervous wreck because I'm like, I don't know who to talk to or how to talk to them or what do I even say? And it was led by an APRN. And so it just kind of flowed. Like she just made you feel like you belong here, and whatever you're experiencing, we've probably all experienced it. So when in doubt, I always say, start with your pediatrician's office, because in my own experience, my children's pediatrician checked in with me more than my OBGYN. And I love my OB, and I'm not speaking for all OBs, but my pediatrician was the first one to say, you look like you're not getting enough nutrition. Like there was one visit, she was like, I'm really worried about the way that your eyes look. And I was like, why? What's wrong with my eyes? And she's like, are you eating enough? Are you getting protein? Are you getting iron into your system? And so I always say, when in doubt, start with your pediatrician's office, because most do offer some sort of mom's group. Some of them have lactation specialists if you're a nursing mom, and then build upon that. Because in the beginning, I mean, I work with so many moms who are like, I don't know where to begin with making mom friends. And like, I don't even know who, like, I see other moms at like places that I may belong to with my husband, but like, I don't even know what do I say? Like, hi, I'm a mom. So I always default to the pediatrician. And then I know a lot of people who have I haven't used it myself, so I guess I can't speak to it, but I have a lot of friends that use the Peanut app. That connects you with other local moms in your area, because there's so many moms I feel like who, like you're saying, they just don't even know where to begin. And so when you're in the trenches, then you just don't begin and you just sit isolated and kind of wondering like, what am I supposed to do? And that's not what any of us want for moms. So starting really small and then building upon that.
Yeah, I had no idea there were Facebook groups like that with my first. And
Yeah.
then I found them when she started daycare. And there was a group for the daycare, and then it started doing all the groups you might know or whatever like that. And it was like, oh, this is a whole new world. And I live in a bigger town. And so there's actually groups based on different ages.
Yeah, that's helpful too.
Super helpful. And then the one thing that was also coming to mind as you were talking was I had Carly Nolan on the podcast. She has a podcast about motherhood. And she's like, the one thing I always tell people if they're nervous to make contact, so to speak, is she's like, literally, if you just start by, if you're standing near someone or across the way and your kids are playing or wherever you are, how old is your kid? Like, that's all you have to do to get the ball rolling. And I've tried it a few times since I interviewed her, you know, a year ago. And it really is like, just that one question opens the door to, even if it's just a relationship with another person for the half an hour that you're at the park.
Yeah.
It's just a touch point of someone that outside world communication, right? B, if they have kids the same age, oh, are they potty training? Like, it just like snowballs into more conversation. Danielle or Kristine, do you want to add anything to the ways that we could start to build community?
I can not really add to it, but I can definitely attest to like the Facebook groups. I know in my community, I found like a parenting network, which was really cool. It's for like my town and the surrounding towns. And it's like they do like meetup groups every week, and they do like mom's night out, and they just have like a lot of different awesome things. So I joined that. I was actually pregnant with my second when I joined, and I was like, oh, I wish I did this with my first. But I was really grateful to have them for my second pregnancy and postpartum.
Yeah. I also found the library to be super helpful. Just going to story times, and you start to see the same people every week, you know, and then you go, hey, how old is your kid? All right. So Danielle, I want to come back to you for a second. Thinking about what you shared about your experience, your husband's a police officer, many times you're alone, like whether it's a first responder, or I was also thinking about like, you've got pilots, restaurateurs, partners are going to have varying schedules. I think even more so now, we have people not just typically working your 9 to 5s, right? What do you think this means for the mom? Does this pose greater mental health risks postpartum? And what advice would you give to someone maybe listening who's in those shoes, wondering how this is going to go?
Yeah. I mean, I think it could. I think there's a great potential for it to cause more mental health struggles. I know for me, I felt very lonely. And I think when you feel lonely and alone, then that leaves room for the mental health struggles to come in. I think preparation, I feel like that's like a big topic in this conversation. Like, you know, if you are trying to conceive or you are pregnant and you know your spouse has this really busy schedule, or maybe they can't take time off or whatever it might be, thinking and having like open communication about that prior to baby coming. I do something with all my clients called a postpartum care plan, where we talk a lot about this, and it doesn't matter. Like, you know, your spouse could be home for 3 months with you. Like, it's still important to have these conversations before the baby comes. Just see, like, there are some things within our control. Like, maybe we can like freeze some meals before, because you know you're going to be by yourself with the kids. You're not going to want to cook dinner. So preparing, I think, is huge. And then communication, as I said, and then your support system. So I know for me with my first, I didn't think about this at all. It also was COVID time, so it wasn't as easy just to like have someone over. But going into my second, I made sure to talk with people. I talked to my mom, talked to some of my friends, and I had like a few girlfriends over, like when my husband went back to work, like his first like overnight shift. I was like, okay, keep your calendar open. Like, you guys are coming over. We're gonna order sushi. You guys can hold the baby. Right. So like, I just knew going into it, like that's what I was gonna need to get through it. And then I think even being open about how much I struggled the first time with the people I trusted. So then they knew like to reach out. They knew to check in on me or offer to come over. So yeah, I think it definitely has the potential to be really challenging. So doing the prep work beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice. I think having what I jotted down as you were talking was, especially for first time moms, I think we severely underestimate the transition.
Mhm.
And so having not only the conversation and the plan, but also the plan B, because, and I always say this even too, and I'm gonna, have it lead into my question for Kristine. It's like, I had the plan to leave my job after my first was born. And then it was a few months later where I wasn't sure that was the right decision, but I felt stuck in the decision because I had made it and that's what we decided. And it was like the whole thing. And so I always say to my friends, I'm like, that's great that that's your plan, but talk about and think about what happens if you want to change your mind. And so, because I don't know, because I think it's hard to come up with an exact plan before you know how you're going to feel and know what it's going to be like for you. But if you know that, or you're open to there being options and knowing that within a week the plan could change, because that's where I got stuck. I was like, oh, I made this big decision. I left my big corporate job and holy crap, I can't go back on it now. And it's like, yeah, well, you totally could have if you really wanted to. So Kristine, you come from a corporate background. What advice would you give to someone struggling potentially with going back to work, or they have gone back to work and they're trying to balance it? Like, that's a whole thing in itself. What are some of your main, drive homes about balancing work life, mom life, and perhaps finding that peace and balance?
Yeah. So all of this is kind of interconnected, to be honest. Like the community piece, the career piece, it really all goes into not being afraid to be vulnerable, not being afraid to say that you can't do it all. Because I feel like a lot of it is the wounding that we have as women to be strong, independent women. We can't admit that we can't handle it. We have the pressure from our families, our mothers. We have this like societal pressure on our shoulders as women. And so we feel like we're failing if we admit that we can't do it, right? But the truth is, we were never meant to do it alone. Like, if we look at the sacred ways that we were in community, and that's why we crave it so much now, because we're remembering, oh my gosh, our ancestors, this is the way they used to live. Like, we want to go back to that communal model. But somehow along the way, it became this very individualistic society in which it was like, oh no, you're on your own, and it's like we're all in survival mode, fending for ourselves. So if we just embrace that community, that vulnerability, and we just remember like, hey, we were never meant to do this alone. There was a reason it takes a village for a reason, right? Like there's that saying for a reason. And this goes back into career also. Having those honest conversations, like Danielle said, setting those expectations for, I may not be able to do this because I'm scared, and it's okay to be scared. And it's okay for me to express my emotions and my feelings and to kind of like alert the people around me, like, hey, this is what I'm experiencing right now. And that doesn't make you a failure. It doesn't make you any less than a mom or a woman because you're admitting to having these feelings. It makes you like everyone else, because guess what? We all have them. We all have them. And so in transitioning back to career, it's, for me, I was a corporate publicist for over a decade. I was working nonstop. Like, even when I left the office, if there was a crisis, I would have to be on my phone all night. I would have to jump on a plane and like travel across the world. I was constantly on call. And I was like, how the hell am I going to have a child? Honestly, Like I work 16 hours a day. How am I squeezing in? For me, it wasn't sustainable. It wasn't fair to me or my child. I didn't want to be that mother, right? Like that kind of mother. And I'm not saying like there's anything wrong with the women who do it. I'm just saying for me and my path, I just knew it wasn't right. And so when I left my job and I decided to, start my own business, I was consulting for a long time. I learned that it's the boundaries. It's being really honest about what you need, however it looks in terms of support, in terms of care, in caring for yourself, in getting that space. We talk a lot about like the mental health stuff, but also I realized I was forcing myself to do things that I really didn't want to do. I was like still working that 9 to 5 mindset, but it's like, I have my own business. Why am I still miserable? Like, why am I forcing myself to? And once I stopped doing that, like, so now I'm like, am I forcing this or does it feel good? Like, am I forcing it or is it flowing? And that's what really made a huge difference for me. Like, let me be honest about what I require as a mom and as a woman. And then from that kind of builds the environment for for our children to thrive. And also because that gives them, the ability to hold their boundaries and to see like, okay, I have a choice, there's a decision to be made here.
Yeah. And I think it all sounds pretty simple, but
Yeah.
like anything with motherhood, it's simple, but not easy. I'm
Right.
hearing you now after 3 years of therapy and 2 kids in a pandemic. And I'm going, yeah, like totally. I can do that. I do that. But 2018, when I had my first, I was like that. I would have heard that and been like, oh, you silly girl.
Yeah.
No way. Like, I got this, not a worry. And it would have been terrifying to actually express that I was scared.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it now. I don't think I ever once said in a real way, I'm nervous, I'm scared to be a mom and what that's going to mean for my life. Like I would jokingly be like, oh my gosh, what's life, but not in a real way. And there's really a lot that could have come from a conversation like that, especially with my partner. And at the time I was living with my parents. So that could have been helpful.
Absolutely.
And this is all, I think, across the board in motherhood. But then sometimes we add the layer of those postpartum mood disorders that take things up a notch. Melissa, can you speak to that a little bit? And, I shared in the notes to you guys that I still sometimes struggle with the stigma of postpartum mood disorders and just really what I struggled with. It took me 2 rounds of postpartum depression to go, oh, hey, you have postpartum depression. Can you talk a little bit about how we can, for ourselves, start to remove some of the shame and guilt and the feelings that come along with when you add that layer of the mood disorder?
Yeah, I think, honestly, and I feel like I keep going back to this, that the problem is that from the start, we're not validating and giving any credit to the fact that you may experience this. And if it happens to you, there is nothing about that indicates you are in any way a bad mother, right? Because I think what happens a lot, at least in my community of the moms that I work with, is that there's so much shame in admitting that it feels harder than you maybe planned for it to be. And if you admit that, then that in some way shows or tells other people that you weren't built for this, right? And maybe you can't do this, and that there's other moms out there that I can't tell you how many times people have said, like, why does it come so naturally to my friends? Like, what's wrong with me? And then, like you said, you don't need a diagnosis to be struggling postpartum, but add the postpartum depression or PPA, and it just takes it up a notch to the point where so many moms don't even want to admit that they're feeling that way. Because there's such a stigma still. I think it's gotten better, like with more people advocating for maternal mental health, but it's still there a little bit in the sense that we're not encouraging moms enough from the start that these are things that could happen. And if they happen, you deserve to get help and supports in place so that you can get to the other side of it and feel better. So moms are still feeling this shame and this guilt of like, well, I should be enjoying this and I'm not. And everybody says, that I talk about this a lot on my Instagram, like enjoy every moment, soak it all in because you're going to blink and it's going to go by. And we give as a society this impression that moms could do it all. And if you can't do it all, right, and if you're not enjoying every moment with your children, then in some way, like, you failed. And we believe that, and we hold on to that, and then we harbor the feeling and we don't say anything. So I think it really starts in normalizing that these are all real things that have happened, and that you are not the first mom in history to experience something like this, and that you can probably walk up and down your block and maybe pull 5 moms, and within the first 5, you're going to find somebody that is going to be like, oh my God, that was me. You're not alone. So it's this sense of, and I think, again, it really is all connected, because it goes back to, if we have a community in place, then we know that we can turn to that community to make us feel validated in whatever we're feeling as moms, and that there will be joyful times, there will be beautiful times, but there's also going to be times that are really challenging and hard. And it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. I always say too, like, perfect moms just exist in perfect worlds. And we all know, like, we don't live in a perfect world. And so it's just an unrealistic expectation that society and we put on ourselves. So.
Yeah. And I think, I know that labeling and a diagnosis isn't for everyone, but I actually had somewhat of the opposite experience, where not knowing what it was, not knowing it was postpartum, more so anxiety with my first, and then certainly depression with my second, but not knowing what it was gave me more feelings of what is wrong with me and I'm failing. And then the second time around, when it was labeled and I was working with a therapist already, it was like, oh, it was like, this isn't me. Like, this isn't me not just loving motherhood or not knowing how to do it, or not knowing, like, there's something actually going on with me in my body that I don't have control over. And that was very freeing, actually, to take the pressure off of myself, my thoughts alone, and trying to piece together what was going on without professional help. Like, that felt scarier and less empowering than knowing what was going on, because then we were very quick to put a plan in place.
Right.
I wasn't like floundering around trying to figure it out. It was like, oh, we've identified this. Here's some tools and strategies you can do right now at home. And I'm going to recommend you to a psychiatrist. We're going to talk about meds. Is that necessary? We're like, it just snowballed into this chain reaction of boom, boom, boom. Now we know what we're going to do to help you get back on track. And then if there hadn't been a pandemic, I probably would have had a third baby, and I would have gone into it with a therapist and a psychiatrist going, let's be prepared this time.
I think there's also a problem in the sense of everything gets lumped under postpartum depression.
Yes.
Right. Like, it's like it's CPD. And so at the start of all my groups, I always do a little slideshow shared screen to go through all of the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And I can't tell you how many times, and I always say, I'm not doing it to scare you. I'm doing it so that because you should know, in my pregnancy groups. And I can't tell you how many times people have said, like, I had no idea about postpartum psychosis. And the fact that people are leaving the hospital, moms and their partners, not knowing the signs and red flags. Yes, it's rare, but not knowing the signs and red flags for postpartum psychosis is honestly a nationwide failure to moms in the United States. Like, there needs to be more education when moms are pregnant to say it's not just postpartum depression. There's postpartum anxiety, there's postpartum OCD, there's postpartum psychosis. And it, again, not to scare people, but just to say, if you experience these things, here's where, Postpartum Support International, everybody that listens to this call should know about that website, because it could plug you in with people right directly in your zip code. And they offer, free parenting things. And it's just a site for all moms. But I really just feel it gets lumped under PPD. And it's like, you have moms who, like you're saying, they don't know. They're going into it not knowing. they're not an expert in mental health, especially in maternal mental health. And so they don't know the signs and the symptoms, and that it's not just depression. There's anxiety and there's other things that could be going on. So yeah, to your point, sometimes having that diagnosis and then knowing like, here's what we're going to do. And then we can actually come back and check in on how you're doing and get you to see an APRN or a psychiatrist. It's, it's pivotal for a lot of moms.
I'll put that link in when I send out the
Mhm.
Erica, I see your question. I just want to touch on infertility with the panelists, and then we'll start with your question. We've been talking a lot about, these feelings that we get, right? Failure, shame, guilt, all the things that when we're struggling with our mental health, especially in motherhood, we tend to initially feel. Danielle, it's funny with Danielle, I think, and Melissa, I had planned to talk about infertility on our episodes and we just didn't get to it. So I wanted to make sure I did today. These are the same types of feelings that can creep in when we have infertility issues. How do we heal from infertility struggles? How do we move forward? How do we help women to understand that this is so not their fault?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's that right there. Like, it is so not your fault. That's so key. And it's also so hard to like, let that sink in when you're going through something like this. There's like such a lack of control, and like, it can feel like a betrayal. This is what I'm made to do. I should, like, all those shoulds start coming up. I should be able to do this. This is what women are made for, right? Like, this whole, like, lots of being so hard on themselves. So I think trying to give yourself some grace. I think a huge part of this is self-compassion. I would say like self-compassion mixed with grieving, right? Trying to like allow yourself that space to grieve. And it's important to look at it like a grieving process and not to like rush through that process. Like, I work with a lot of women who maybe just want to like rush through that or like distract themselves from it. Like, it's just it can be so painful that it's hard to sit in. So I think, again, like self-compassion, grieving through it. And then, what we've been talking about a lot today is support. So professional support, a community, people who can relate to you and give you that like encouragement that you need through such a difficult process.
Okay. And Kristine, we did touch on this. We had such a fascinating conversation. I learned about spirit babies. Is there anything that you would add to that? And as far as how you help women with infertility or loss around pregnancy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think also just to remember, birth is a portal. Not only are we birthing a new life, but we're also birthing a new woman in that portal. And a lot of the mental health stuff that we don't get prepared for as a society too kind of is like, Danielle mentioned, it's a grieving process when we, are going through infertility or the loss of a child, but also we forget that we're grieving the woman that we used to be. Right. Like, and that takes a huge hit on our mental health, because guess what? We have the child and then it's like, we don't even get to process these emotions, this grief, this life that we once lived that we're never going to live again the same, and it's just like off to the races. It's like, okay, everything's about the baby. Everyone's asking about the baby. No one's asking about me. And it's like, and that catches up with us. And part of, the space that I hold for women who are consciously conceiving, maybe they're on their second round of IVF, maybe they've experienced a miscarriage. Some of my clients have been trying to conceive for 7-8 years, and then they start getting into their 40s and giving up on that dream. And, there's a lot of factors that go into the conception process. There's our partner, there's us, there's the baby, all of us are on our kind of own journey and our own timeline. And, I from what I've seen working with hundreds of women around the world doing the spirit baby readings is we're moving into a new place as women and as a collective society, one that is making space for this awakening of mental health professionals, like all the things that we feel like we wanted and needed. We're starting to materialize that. We're starting to create these spaces for women to feel really nourished and safe in their experience in becoming mothers. And a lot of what I see in terms of infertility is still this kind of feeling not worthy of being a mother. Also, our environment is so toxic, unfortunately. So sometimes it's actually detoxing our physical bodies, our spiritual bodies. I work with a lot of energy. I'm attuned in Reiki, so I do a lot of energy healing as well for my women who are trying to conceive. A lot of it is like this trauma that we're holding on to. A lot of it is like clearing the space, because imagine if we don't feel like we're good enough, or literally our bodies are storing so much trauma. And a great book to read about this is The Body Keeps the Score, where we're storing so much trauma within our bodies that it's like we can't even create space to receive a baby. And there's a lot of there's a lot of like scientific evidence for this metaphysical work as well. Dr. Joe Dispenza talks a lot about this. The medical medium has a lot of like practices around there's more cases of endometriosis, of fibroids. Like a lot of women are having also these physical manifestations of this trauma that we've been holding on to for so long. So a lot of that is what I kind of help my clients work through, all of this trauma, these limiting beliefs, feeling that they aren't enough. And then also just, living in alignment. A lot of the children, when I'm communicating with spirit babies, mom is not living in complete alignment. Like she knows she wants to change careers, but there's a lot of fear stepping into that role, stepping into, that woman, that mother role. There's a lot of fear that women have in releasing a lot of this stuff and becoming someone new. So those are really common themes that I see: career, ancestral trauma, like what your family has been through, like the mother wound is a huge, and I'm sure Melissa and Danielle, you might have some clients who are experiencing like mother wounding or issues with their mothers, and then like becoming a mother. There's just so many different layers of healing to peel back.
And at the end of the day, doing that work can only help you, no matter what the outcome, right?
And your children. Our children, we pass down less, generational trauma. Epigenetics shows that we hold on to the trauma of our mothers, our grandmothers, and everyone. Imagine there's generations of women who've come before us who've lived really traumatic lives. I mean, the the 1800s, we've had like a traumatic past as a society, and we're holding on to that. And, culturally, depending on where you're from, what your lineage is ancestrally, people have been through a lot of suffering, and we still hold on to those patterns. So it's really interesting to see what happens when we let go of them, because our children, like these children that are coming now, they're here to help us grow and evolve. So they require a lot more from us. Even my children are very challenging, and I'm like, that's because you require more from me. Like you're here to like do beautiful things in the world,
Mindset shift there. Okay, thank you. Erica has a question. How do you set boundaries with your spouse, especially as a working mom and already feeling stretched thin? Does someone want to take that? Any follow-up questions that we might need to ask Erica?
Yeah, I guess I could take that. I guess I would be curious in the sense of what type of boundaries are you looking to implement? Because I feel like the word boundaries is like this big umbrella, right? So when you're talking about it in relation to your spouse, what are some of the feelings that are coming to the surface that lead you to believe that you need to implement a boundary when it comes to your spouse, especially being a working mom? I was just talking with somebody recently about boundary work in general. And I think the first step that we miss so often, and what leads to then more difficult implementation of the boundary and then standing by the boundary and being firm, is that we don't sit enough with our own self-reflection on what it is that we need the boundary to be, right? So that word boundary is such an umbrella. I guess my question back would be, what are some of the feelings that are coming to the surface, right? That lie beneath, that lead you to desire to have a boundary to implement with your husband, is a question that I would ask back before getting into then how do you go about implementing and figuring out what even is that boundary that you need to have with him.
Erica, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a good follow-up question. I think the self-reflection is a good point. I guess I'm just thinking, like, to the point someone else made earlier, like, I'm definitely one of the people that just assumes I'm going to try to do everything, like work the corporate job and be the present mom and do all the appointments. And I just kind of want my husband to focus on his work and try not to bother him. But it is a lot to assume you're going to be the one doing everything. And because he doesn't volunteer, it's kind of on me to somewhat like delegate in my house. So I'm just trying to think about, like, when you don't have, like, I think he's willing to help, but it's kind of on me to set the tone, if that helps give you some more color.
Yeah, it does. It does. I always think too, one of the things that is skipped over that moms don't talk about, or at least people have said to me, is like the strain that having babies puts on the marriage, and then navigating, like, what is that? I think Kristine, you said before, like, the birth of the baby is a birth of a new woman. It's the birth of a new marriage. It's something that you collectively with your partner have never done. I don't know if you've heard the term, Erica, maybe you have, a default parent, like being the default parent.
I haven't heard that.
Yeah, and everything kind of falls on your plate, but it sounds like you have a partner or husband that is willing to participate. And so my answer probably won't come as a surprise to you. I mean, I'll let Danielle and Kristine weigh in too, but I think we don't give enough credit to communicating what our needs are, right? And so it's fair to probably say that your husband is hardworking, but it sounds like you're also a working mom. And so the expectation that you're putting on yourself to be the one that does it all is setting the bar so high that if you don't meet it, you're the one that's going to feel let down and like you could have done more. When you have a partner who's actively involved and willing to participate, I would be starting with sitting with, what do I really need? Like, what's underneath the surface that could potentially help me and take the load off a little bit? And then how do I effectively communicate that in a collaborative way with my husband, as like, we're a team doing this together. And it would really help me if, we could have you maybe do, and I'm just throwing out an example, like all of the kids' dentist appointments, right? And I'll keep the kids' pediatrician appointments, and really sitting with what's going to help me. And then knowing too, and we said this before, like, you can have this perfect plan and you can communicate it and you could talk about it, and then you could put it to fruition and like it completely flops. And it's like, you got to go back to the drawing board. There's nothing wrong with what you tried to implement, but you need to get creative, and like, maybe there's something else that you actually need him to help you with. And so I'm a huge component of sort of sitting with it myself first before, and that goes for any boundary, whether it be your mother-in-law, your mom, your husband. What do I need the boundary to be so that I could get the support in place? And then how can I effectively communicate to that person, whoever it is, how having this boundary is going to be beneficial for me and for your relationship?
Yeah, and if
Kristine? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. If I would just piggyback off of that, I think something practical would be to like actually set aside time every week, like have like a family meeting, at least once a week, where you can actually talk through this and like have the calendar out and just be on the same page. Because maybe you can just kind of wing things pre-baby, but then you throw in a whole other like human being into the household and it can get really chaotic. So actually setting aside time. And then there's a good book called Fair Play that talks all about this too. So that's something I would recommend.
Kristine, you had wanted to say something as well.
Oh yeah, kind of like a combination of both Melissa and Danielle. I work with a lot of women who are either corporate, transitioning from their corporate jobs, starting new businesses, but I always tell them too, like, one of the things that we get to take a look at is how we structure our days, time management, but also I kind of have them do an exercise of like a priority matrix. Like, what are your non-negotiables and what are your negotiables? Personally, like, I don't love, like, basically, what are some of the things that you love doing? What are some of the things that you don't love doing? What are some of the things that your partner, but also having your partner participate in it, like him being honest with, this is what I really love doing, this is what I don't love doing, but also, having that awareness of what is non-negotiable for you. Like, no, I realized quickly I need quiet time. Like, I've always been like the type of person, like, I need at least an hour of like thinking. Like, I just need to be able to think. I need to brainstorm. I'm a very like visionary person, but I just need that space in order for my visions to come through. Like, whether that's meditation, for my husband, one of his non-negotiables is he wants to work out, and he wants to play soccer on Mondays. I want to be able to go to acupuncture. Like, what are some of the things that are, and not even from like, but like things that you need, like Melissa was saying, like, what are some of the things that you need outside of, oh, well, somebody has to pack the kids' lunches too. Like, what are some of the things that make you feel really good and supported so that when you're getting that, you could be showing up as your best self? Because maybe it's like some of the self-care stuff that is not getting attention right now. And I find that the majority of the time, it's when those things that we want aren't getting met, like what needs of yours are not getting met, that's when we start getting pissed off and frustrated and overwhelmed, because it's like, oh no, mama didn't get her hour today. So now I'm like, I don't have any patience. I'm hungry. What are some of those things, like those basic needs? They're like, and even if it looks like, no, I need to get a massage. Like, I will tell you, I get a massage every month. I do my womb steaming every month. I get my quiet time every day, even on the weekends. Like, how does that, and just being honest with your partner and saying, okay, this is what I need to feel really good and fulfilled. And like, how can we outsource the rest? Because too, sometimes we think like, oh, the laundry needs to get done and it needs to get done now. Like, my house has to be really clean. Like, the dishes have to be done. But what are those priorities? Like, do the dishes need to be done right now? Maybe they don't. Like, maybe taking your kids out for a walk is more important. Like, maybe the laundry could get done on the weekend, because these are some of the societal expectations too of like, oh, my house isn't clean. Like, that's a failure too. And it's not any reflection of you as a woman or as a mom. It's just about, what are your needs? What are your priorities? How are they getting met? And making sure that you're sticking to that. And again, flexibility, it doesn't look the same every month, but the fact that you are actively participating and communicating that with your partner is a huge relief in itself.
I will just say too, I started addressing this type of conversation with my husband initially from a very emotional point of view. I was getting myself to the point of burnout where I was crying through these conversations. And I can tell you that, at least in my relationship, this didn't work so well. I actually was better served coming to him before I was emotional.
Yeah.
And he appreciated that so much that it made a bigger impact. And he basically said to me, whatever I can do to make sure that those previous conversations where you can't even speak, you're crying so hard, like, I want to avoid those at all costs, because they make me feel like he doesn't want me to be that way, right? So it was this awareness on my part as well, that I think as women, to say I need something can feel really uncomfortable, but to my partner, I see it in like the silliest things too. Like, he'll be on the phone with a customer service rep and he'll just be like, I need this and da da da. And I'm like, wow, look at you, just ask for that, or like, you see the jokes about women at the nail salon who hate their nails and they don't say anything. Like, my husband has no idea what that feeling is like. And so I think when he hears me approach things more the way he would, in a way, he doesn't take it to heart. Like, he doesn't be like, wow, you're so needy. He's just like, yeah, you need this. Okay, great. And that was a big shift for me. And the only other thing I wanted to add to it was, I'm an imperfect mom in an imperfect world, as Melissa said, and we have a code word now for when I'm done. I'm in the trenches and I'm done, and it could mean anything. It could mean I'm having an anxiety attack. It could mean I'm in depression. It could mean I'm literally I'm going to scream. And instead of having to try to articulate this, when I say this word, he knows that it means that I need him to completely step up and take off all of my responsibilities, particularly for our kids, for at least the rest of the day, if it's possible. And it's usually now to the point where it's like, if he comes home from work and I've called him on the way home and I say this word, he knows it means he has to come in, bathe them, put them to bed, because I'm probably curled up in a ball somewhere. And that has really helped us, because it's hard to articulate when you're burnt out what you need. And as my partner, he just is more action oriented. So in hearing this word, it's like, he doesn't have to say, well, what do you need? It's like, he already knows and he's on the run and he just does it most if he can. So.
And if I could add, Christy, too, something I often tell my clients about too, like in terms of like being self-aware too, because a lot of the times it's like, well, I don't even know what I need, right? Like, I don't know what the hell I need. I just know that I need something, right? But like, if we look at basic necessity, like we're human, we want love, we want to give love, we want to receive love. What are your love languages? Quality time, physical touch, words of affirmation, acts of service, gifts. What are your love languages?
Mhm.
And are those getting met? But also, are you meeting those of your partner? Because that's where it all begins. Like, that's the foundation work. If we're not being met at the foundation, then everything else is just going to pile on top of us. So that's also something I love to tell my clients, like just being really aware of what your love languages are, how you receive them, also how you give them, and what are the love languages of your partner? How do they receive love and how do they give love? And just constantly checking in, like, are our love languages being met?
Yeah, that was one other thing I wanted to say is like, I hate this aspect of it. So I don't say this like with a big smile on my face. It's a sarcastic smile, but it is constantly evolving, the back and forth of how we're helping each other and what we each need. And like I said, I hate it. We have to readdress it however often, depending on what the kids need and work schedules. My husband's in busy season right now for work, so that has shifted everything. But just the acknowledgement, I guess, to you, Erica, that you might go and have great conversations right now, and then in another month you might have to have them all over again. And it sucks, but it helps. Erica, do you have anything, any follow-up or anything? And just
No, I just took a lot of notes and thought you guys had really great things to say. And I do feel like I have a good community. My sister's actually on the line too, but I think this topic, in terms of how you guys were saying, like birthing a new marriage and working through it and really trying to stay on top of it, I don't think I really talked a lot about that with my friends because people are kind of personal about relationships. But it's definitely a big element in the picture. So appreciate all the wisdom.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We had quite a few questions from people that couldn't attend, but seeing as I only have you for another couple of minutes here, I did not ask you in the beginning, like I usually do, for your book recommendations. So I want to make sure I share those, because that has been something that in past panels people have really responded to and gotten into. Danielle, would you share yours first, please?
Yeah. A book that I really loved for myself and I recommend to so many of my clients is Good Moms Have Scary Thoughts by Karen Kleiman.
I will put these all in the email with the recording. So if you're listening, you don't have to be frantically writing down. Okay. Awesome. And I will include Fair Play because that was like revolutionary information to me when I read it the first time. Melissa, would you share yours?
Yeah. So actually, I don't know if mine is the same. I have two. I don't know if mine is the same as Danielle, but I actually just read it for CEU work, but Dropping the Baby and Other Scary Thoughts. Is it the same book? It's the same.
It's not the same book, but she has a few good books.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Interesting.
Yeah, she's a good one.
Yeah, so it's the same author, but it's called Dropping the Baby and Other Scary Thoughts. And then the other one is Enough About the Baby by Becky Vieira. She has a pretty big Instagram.
Yeah.
I'm all about like saying the nitty gritty and really preparing for what is to come. And that book kind of goes into, it's an unapologetic way of letting mom know like what is to come. So those are my two.
Okay, and Kristine?
So I would recommend Spirit Babies for anyone who might be interested in growing or starting their family. Super interesting in terms of like the spiritual connection of motherhood and, soul contracts and all of that stuff. And I also have a book called Mantras that I wrote when I was 9 months pregnant and experiencing postpartum anxiety, which I never knew existed. And affirmations and mantras really helped me through that time, as well as most of my journey. So,
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Erica, for sharing. I appreciate it. Danielle, Melissa, Kristine, it's been so fun getting to know you guys over the last month, and I just really appreciate your time. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
thank you so much, Christy.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.